Hey, it's Paul Banis of GreatDad.com, and I'm here with my weekly show talking to fathers and trying to get a feel for modern fatherhood today. And we're talking today with Jonathan Steele, who's a family law attorney, and a subject that we haven't talked about for a long time. It's about divorce and the effect on kids. So welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, I'm very curious about this, and maybe I should be talking about it more because you do hear a lot from dads who feel like they've given up their rights. I've had personal experience with actually quite a number of friends who've been accused in the process and have lost their rights or have had to go through really huge battles to even get any kind of even just joint custody. How do you think the landscape has changed on this, or have men always been a little bit weaker in the child part of the divorce equation?
Historically, they've been on unequal footing for sure. There was whether in practice or in actual name, there was a term called the tender years doctrine for a long time that
Mhm.
judges adhered to, that guardian ad litems adhered to, which basically said, at least in the early stages of a child's life, they were better suited to be with their moms than they were to be with their dads. And that's drastically changed over the years. At least in Illinois, now the presumption is that the child's best interests are served by equal time with both parents.
Well, my parents got divorced when I was, I think, separated when I was two, divorced when I was four, and I stayed with my mom. I'll never know whether my dad would have made different decisions, but consequently, because he didn't have joint custody, he ended up getting married and moving across the country. He tried to do as good a job as he could. I mean, we're talking the 60s and 70s, but that may have influenced the fact that he didn't have as much reason to stay physically present if he didn't actually have joint custody. We talk a lot on this show about, and hopefully maybe we've been a little bit part of that process of more involved fatherhood by dads. Do you see in your practice more men, demanding that they have joint custody and that it's a bigger thing to them than it may have been years ago?
I would say, with few exceptions, almost every dad that comes in now wants equal time. They want to have an equal say in decision making, and they want just as much time as mom. Um, I suspect different motives for different people, but largely, I think most of them have good motives, that it takes it takes two parents to bring a child into the world. It takes two to raise them well. So you could be the best mom in the world and you can't be a good dad as a mom.
Yeah, I would endorse that. I think love in the family is the most important thing, but I do believe in the value of a mom and a dad figure. I think a lot of research has been about gay couples even searching out a member of the opposite sex to represent that other feeling, and certainly a dad or a mom in the picture is the best option. Of course, at the end of the day, uh, love at home is the most important thing. Uh, so when you're talking to fathers about, I don't know if you end up in the situation where there's a step that comes before an actual declaration of a divorce, and dads are trying to figure out whether they even need to defend themselves or set something up differently. How do you react to that? And what is the first thing that men should do if they're facing even the possibility of a divorce?
This is a hard one to accept because you're keeping someone in a war zone. But unfortunately, if you just walk out of the home because it's tense, because it's unbearable, or it's just hostile living environment, you're giving your spouse a leg up just by not being in the home, just by not sharing the home with your child anymore. You're losing a little bit of ground right from the start. So I tell people pretty regularly, if you can stick it out in the home, stick it out in the home, at least until there's a temporary parenting schedule in place. Because if you walk out and then you try to get a temporary schedule, you're not going to be able to do it on an emergency basis. It could take months to get even a hearing. And you shouldn't have to fight for time with your child. You're in an ideal world, mom says it's best for our kids that you have a relationship with them, and she facilitates it. But oftentimes that's not the case. There's too much hostility to put that interest first. So I suppose the advice I would give is stick it out in the home for your kids' sake until you at least get a temporary parenting schedule in place.
Okay, that's good advice. obviously a lot of that we're going to be talking about is from the point of the view of the father. I don't want to paint the picture, and I'm sure that's not your experience either, because you defend or work with men and women. But in this case, we're going to be acting like the dad is more the wrong party than the mom, but that's not certainly not that's certainly not a blanket statement. Are there other considerations in that? I guess I get that's the one I would think that would be the most or maybe it's not the most obvious, but you can see why it's kind of like that possession is 90% of the law. Is like the minute you walk away, you're kind of walking away from your responsibilities. Hard to get them back. Are there other things that would set up what has happened to some of my friends? They've actually been accused of abuse or of assault in the process of the act of the divorce, of bringing up the divorce, and they've lost their rights because of that. And I think even most men would just shudder at the fact of even being accused of those things, say nothing to, having done them and then trying to recover. But what would you suggest if you know that you are married, unfortunately, with somebody who would go to like any lengths to get back at you or to get 100% custody?
I think documenting, journaling is important. It's almost impossible to at least credibly do after the fact. If you're doing it in the moment and you're keeping a contemporaneous journal of, not just grievances with your spouse, but things that you're doing with your child, keeping, your photos, because after the divorce starts, all of a sudden, often you're going to be painted as an uninvolved dad, a dad that, has never really been in the picture, that hasn't been part of decision making, that hasn't, been too busy with work and hasn't really been involved in the parenting time. And the best way you can combat that is to say, I've been keeping a journal over the last couple of years of all the things that I've been doing with my kids, and I've been keeping it contemporaneously. You could even do it on your computer where you're keeping the metadata such that it could actually be proven that it was contemporaneous and you can't be accused of, just manufacturing it after the fact. And then just pictures with your kids, at these events that, you're not necessarily taking the pictures for evidence sake. You're taking them to document good times with your kids, but you're checking two boxes by doing it. So I think just, keeping that kind of stuff at the ready, because unfortunately it may end up being pivotal if you end up going to battle with your spouse.
Well, that's frightening. Do you get a sense of when you're talking to men in this situation who may have been accused, whether they are, I guess my question is, how often do you think that is used as a cudgel and not a correct accusation? I mean, is this something that happens all the time, or is it really a rarity?
It happens too often.
Too
I
often.
can't give a good percentage on it, but there's actually in Illinois, there's an appellate court case that talks about the misuse of the Domestic Violence Act to gain leverage in a custody fight. You're using it as a sword. People sometimes start out their divorce case with an order of protection that they didn't really need, just because you can get one. They kind of give them out like candy, at least on the first date, so that nothing bad happens and the judge gets accused of, missing the ball. And that sometimes is used to give somebody a leg up, whether there's true abuse or not. It's just a way of starting the case off with an advantage. And it does happen, and it happens too often for sure.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm sure you work with women. Is it something that like is considered just good strategy then to start with that, or is that considered a little bit unethical to even begin with that?
I don't do it. I try not to badmouth my colleagues. Some do it, and sometimes it's effective. But push come to shove, you're sitting 2 years down the road in a trial, and the story unfolds. That's how you started out the case. One of the main considerations the court takes into account, at least in Illinois, is the willingness and ability of each parent to facilitate a relationship with the other parent. That's one of the most important considerations. And if you start out the case misusing an order of protection to keep your child's father from seeing them, how willing and able are you to facilitate that father-child relationship? Judges don't look kindly on that. So it can end up being a short-term win, and you may end up losing the war because you started off on that note.
Yeah, yeah. I've had that experience with coaching clients of my own, where through the process there's an alienation of the father. In fact, where the relationship with the child was very good up until the start of the divorce, and then suddenly the poison is put in the well, and there's more of a separation. So there's an active, pushing apart of of the relationship between the father and the child. I've also so I have had coaching. Have had coaching clients who are actually assigned not had me, or they were told as part of the agreement that they would each get a coach. Are you seeing the use of coaching as playing a role in tandem with family therapy in terms of how couples are asked to try to be better or try to work through the issues involved with the divorce?
I'm seeing parenting coordinators that
Mhm.
are appointed, and I think that's a similar
Right.
job. It's not, I don't think it's exactly a coach. I think you would know better than me, obviously, but maybe a coach is working on one side as opposed to both. And I
Right.
think a parenting coordinator is trying to, at least at the start, walk the line in the middle and try to just facilitate better communication and, help make the decision-making process smoother. And it can be a valuable asset. It does keep people out of court sometimes. So there is a tendency towards that, at least as of late.
Yeah, so a coach would in general be asking questions about what the client would want to do to fix certain situations, and with the idea that the client has the answers. And I'm sure in the case of an administrator, they actually have training in how to do this with specific ideas of how do you facilitate, tools you use, how to set up play dates or pickups and everything so everything works smoothly. What do you think the biggest problems or during the process that men could try to avoid? I guess I'm trying to pick apart where guys can go wrong and what advice you can give them through the process of what things they may be missing out on doing. Obviously, being a good father, I think the journaling idea is a perfect one, especially if you feel like you're at risk. Are there other things they should be getting in front of?
Yeah, so I think there are two that are very important. I think one of them is trying to keep a sense of perspective as best as you can, which is of course easier said than done. Try to avoid counting the minutes. A lot of times people, fathers included, get hung up on the percentages and the numbers. I need 50-50, otherwise this isn't fair, or my child is suffering. And I push back sometimes on clients and I'll ask them, what does that mean? What is 50-50? What specific schedule? And then you just sort of get a glazed over look a lot of the time because they don't know. They don't know what days, they don't know what hours. Maybe they can't even do 50-50. But anything off of that, whether it's 51-49 or more, feels unfair. It feels like it's judgmental, that it's accusing dad of being a bad parent because they got less than exactly 50%. And, it's quality over quantity. It's, try not to count the minutes, try not to count the hours, and focus more on what are you doing with your time when you do have parenting time? How are you building memories? How are you building connections, making your time as best as possible? Because you could have all the time in the world, but if you're sitting around staring at the wall, you're not building any memories, right? The other one that I would say is important is it's easy to be upset, whether you're in a divorce case or in a paternity case, and it's easy to let things slip about the person on the other end of that fight. And as best you can, it's important to try to restrain yourself when you're in earshot of your child. To the point I made earlier, one of those most important considerations is, are you also facilitating a relationship between the child and their mom? And so bad mouthing her when the child is around, or doing things to try to cut her out of the child's life, is going to hurt you in the long run. So a lot of times, if I'm on, I suppose it depends which side I'm on, but I would encourage dads to, as much as it might pain you, to have a picture or two of mom in their home so that the child is seeing mom as a part of both homes, to help the child make a Mother's Day gift for their mom, and to buy or help them make birthday gifts for mom, and to, do things that outwardly show a willingness and ability to facilitate that relationship with mom, because that's going to go a long way in convincing a judge or a guardian ad litem that time with you is not spent poisoning the child towards their mom, and that it really is in the child's best interest to have as much time with you as possible.
I'm sure a lot of guys would worry though that if they give up, like let's say they agree to 80-20 because they just are at a point in their career where they don't have as much time and it's easier, or it's like you say, they can get more quality time if they shorten it. They worry that that will be locked in then forever at 80-20, and they'll never get the other 30 back if they get into a different situation. Are there ways that in the divorce that you can set that up so this is a temporary thing, or that's going to be revisited without a lot of legal fighting, or is that naive?
If you see like a career change on the horizon, you can try to build in a step up schedule or some sort of like self-effectuating change to the schedule. If you're 60 years old and you're gonna retire in 2 years, then you can say in 2 years the schedule changes as follows. But it's important to remember that outside of, Illinois has at least like a 2 year let the ink dry phase, other than is there like an emergency or a serious endangerment where you can't really change things that are major. Outside of that, everything related to children is modifiable, whether it's child support or whether it's parenting time or decision making. If you can come back to court and say the circumstances have changed and they've changed substantially, you can shake up the parenting schedule. You can get more parenting time. You can get more decision making. And so sometimes you'll just want to stop the bleed while you're bleeding in the middle of your case with the hope of coming back and asking for more time. Maybe you take 60-40 today, and it's a terrible expression, but you're giving mom enough rope to hang herself or to show who she truly is. And then you come back a year, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and you say it was 60-40 for the last few years. It's not a great arrangement. I need to have more time now, maybe even more than 50% of the time. So, it's a well-founded concern that you're articulating, because status quo does matter a lot. And the more you let a schedule sink in, the harder it's going to be to move it. But it's not impossible. And if it's in the best interest of your child and something has changed, like your work schedule changes or you're not traveling as much and you just have more time available, and judges will give you more time.
And I would guess that if you hadn't been doing that journaling before, that would be the time to start doing the journaling to protect yourself. I mean, maybe that's advice that you'd give any dad if they're divorced, and even if it's 50-50, and you think you're in a person who's really aggressive, you should keep on journaling to make sure that you're getting down all those experiences, all the times that the child said something negative about either one of you or whatever, so that it could be used later. Is that true?
Absolutely. I think journaling is always going to be important. I think there are multiple benefits to it. I think therapists would tell you there's a side benefit to it, that you're sort of like getting out your thoughts and frustrations in writing as opposed to taking them out on mom or the child. So there's that sort of fringe benefit. But anytime you're preparing for litigation, if it's post judgment, that journaling, that creation and preservation of evidence is going to be important.
Well, yeah, be perfect time just to do your gratitude journaling at the same time and kill two birds with one stone. So also, I've had experience with moms and dads who've fled with their kids, like, we're just taking a vacation to New York for the week and we'll be back, and then they never return. Do you see that often? Is that often a strategy people use to try to?
Not all that often, but it does happen. If you are absconding to somewhere in the United States, that's going to be a short-lived vacation, so to speak. You're going to get ordered to return the child, whether you come along with or not. Where it does get drawn out and very litigious and very expensive is when you flee the country with your child, and then you have what's called a Hague case. And there are even some countries that are not Hague signatories, and then you might be trying to force the return of your child from such a country. So we've litigated some Hague cases, and they are a mess. But if it's just, I'm going to visit my mom in New York and I'll come back when I feel like it because I'm mad at you in the moment, that's only going to last for so long.
I've actually had experience with clients who've had to have gone to the Hague, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like the biggest determinant there was where the child was actually born. Even if he or she was a citizen of the United States, if he or she was born in another country, that country takes the fact that the child was born there very seriously when it comes to, especially if they live in that country, wresting the child away and taking it somewhere else. Is that true?
One of the bigger considerations is what's called the home state. So basically where you've been for the 6 months preceding the removal. So If you lived in California for 6 months and then mom ups and goes to Spain, California is the home state of the child. So California is going to have continuing jurisdiction to enforce the terms of that order, and they're going to order the return of the child back to the state of California.
So that would be true even in the United States. If you suddenly California to New York, for example, the child would have to come back to California to make the final determination, or before anybody could move at all, that it would have to be settled in California.
Yeah. When you're dealing with that, then it's a different set of laws than Hague. It's the UCCJEA, Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction Enforcement Act, but it's the same consideration, which is home state, and it's still a 6 month. Where were you 6 months preceding? And in that case, if you lived in California for 6 months and a day, that's the home state. That's the state that will rightfully make a determination as to custody or parenting time.
Wow, there are just so many angles on this whole issue that are both, tragic and I guess strategic at the same time. Are there other things that we're missing? I mean, we've kind of picked apart a bunch of different little details that interest me from my experience just with my clients. But what overall is there something that we should be talking about that turns out to be like a bigger issue than maybe somebody would think going in? One thing I guess I was thinking of is the fact that some people want, in a divorce, they want the money and they don't want the kids, or they want the kids and they don't want the money. Is it ever like that where you can just like say, I'll give you the house, I'll give you the 401k, just let me have the kids, and people walk away with, okay, I got what I wanted?
There are times where I will be representing dad, and it will become clear to me that mom's motive in opposing significant parenting time for dad is money, that
Yeah.
she is reluctant to give him more time because she wants that child support. And to the extent my client in that situation can afford it, I will tell them, offer to pay her the child support regardless of what the parenting schedule is. Put that in an order that even if I have 70% of the parenting time, I'm going to pay you the full amount of child support. And then you sort of take that concern out of her mind, or that bullet out of her gun. And then she may be more willing to resolve the case without having to go to court over it. If you tell her and you put it in writing and you put it in an order that even if I have what I think is a good parenting schedule, I'll still pay you, then you're getting rid of what's a bad motive. It really should never be financial when you're talking about what is the best schedule for the child. So
Yeah, I like that. I guess you do work though with people who have means. I mean, I think in the description, you're high stakes divorce attorney, so they have a little bit more of a flexibility in that. But even so, I get your point, is that to separate, trying to decouple the money part from the parenting part is what you're getting at, so that in the end, nobody feels like they're using that custody part as a bargaining chip rather than what's best for the child. Yeah, go ahead.
sorry. I try to do it as much as I can, like in a divorce case, you've got two main components. You've got the money, you're allocating the estate, and then you have the parenting things. I like to get the parenting things off the table
Oh,
at
right.
the very outset of the case. Get an allocation judgment, a parenting agreement done, and then we can fight about money, because that sometimes gets nasty, and you shouldn't hold up one for the other, because what's most important there is the child. You can always make more money. That's really not the real issue there. The real issue is the kid. And so anytime you can address that first as the priority, you should. And, just because, to your point, yes, I do have clients that have the financial flexibility to agree to pay child support notwithstanding their schedule, but they're as resistant as anybody else, right? On principle. So if I have 50-50, why should I have to pay her child support? Well, maybe you shouldn't, but do it anyway, because your kid comes first. You want to make sure they're taken care of when they're with mom too. And if it gets you the schedule you want and stops the fighting, you're probably better off doing it. And, if you have a good relationship with mom, that benefits the child. So maybe it goes a long way to do that as well. So
Yeah.
I do encourage clients to do that whenever they're willing.
That's really good advice. Do you end up kind of playing therapist to a lot of these people? I mean, I know every time we've gotten involved with lawyers for things that are not related to parenting, thankfully, but that a lot of it has always come down to the lawyers like talking through us through, like, do you really want to get involved in this for your mental health or for your financial well-being? Do you really want to fight this hard about something, like on principle, as you suggest? Like, you get so wrapped up in it's unjust, it's unfair, I've been taken advantage, I want to, get revenge. And a good lawyer, I guess an honest lawyer, will try to talk you off the wall, rather than saying, oh yeah, I'll engage you to spend a couple $100,000 to fix your problem.
I do. I end up wearing a therapist hat almost more often than I wear my lawyer hat. If I'm in court, I'm usually wearing the lawyer hat. If I'm outside of court, it's almost always a therapist hat. And it doesn't fit very well, but I have to wear it sometimes.
Would you advise lawyers going into family law to get some marriage and family therapy training?
It would be helpful. A lot of the calls we field have nothing to do with the law. It's more about the emotion and the feelings involved. And yeah, it's very therapeutic in nature just by virtue of being an emotional practice. So
You got kids of your own, two and five, right? Two little boys. You before we started, you mentioned the fact that having kids of your own has changed your perspective on what you do and all the proceedings. Is there anything that you can tell us about how that perception has changed? Maybe just on the stakes.
I think it definitely changed the stakes, but it reinforced my earlier advice that how important it is to avoid your child hearing you talk bad about the other parent. It's tempting, even in a happy marriage. It's, everybody gets frustrated. Everybody has an outburst once in a while where you just want to say something that the child doesn't need to hear, and it causes tension for them. And I hear from psychologists all the time, or child custody evaluators, that children have a tendency in a divorce or in a paternity case to want to blame themselves for the conflict.
Yeah.
And they do that because it gives them an element of control. If they don't think that they're to blame, then they feel completely out of control as to what's happening. So they wear it, they own it. And you need to take that back from them and make them understand that they don't own it, that they're not to blame, that they have nothing to do with the discord between yourself and uh, the other parent. So it really did reinforce the importance of, do not badmouth the other parent. There's a time and a place. There will be a time when your children aren't standing next to you, and by all means, it's healthy to voice your emotion and your feelings verbally, but do it out of earshot of your child. So it did really reinforce that. And it also reinforced quality over quantity. As a lawyer, I don't have a ton of time with my kids. So when I do have the time to spend with them, I make sure as best I can that I'm engaged, that I'm spending it with them. I try to put the phone away. I try to, roll around on the floor with them. And I think those are the core memories that they're going to remember when they grow up, not necessarily did I make it home on Wednesday night when I was supposed to be preparing for a trial, just when I am home, what are we doing together? So I think it reinforced that as well.
Yeah, well, that's really good advice. I mean, that's part of what the show is supposed to be about, is just trying to reaffirm all these like basic ideas and remind people, because with our daily lives, sometimes you do forget about how important it is just to spend those, put the phone down, even for 10 minutes or during dinner or whatever. And it's easy to default to what we're all motivated to do by all the social media, is to not have those interactions with your kids. And on a personal note, I mean, I know just how clear it is to kids, because they hear the story. Mom and dad fell in love, they got married, they were going along for 2 or 3 years, then baby shows up and a year later they get divorced. How could the child not think it's due to the fact that they arrived on the scene?
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think the corollary to that is the parents that stay together until the child goes off to college and then they get divorced. And so then that college age child thinks, you guys were unhappy our whole lives and you stayed together unhappy just because of me. And so then they wear that also. So it's an unfortunate thing. It's also, if you recognize real early on that it's not working, you may be in that amnesia phase for the child. I think, I don't remember the exact years, but maybe up to age 3 or 4, it's hard to actually remember things looking back on it. So if you recognize early on, maybe as early as your child being in that amnesia age, that things aren't working, that may be the time to try to figure out, are we going to split, as opposed to doing it at a time when the child has already built memories and will remember it, how it was.
Yeah, well, I could say from my own personal experiences that having them get divorced before I was, like you say, out of that amnesia phase, I have no memories of a happy family life that I lost, or anything other than just one or two scenes that play in my mind of, us being together, but there's no memory of acrimony or anything else. So for me, I was just a child of divorce, not a child who went through a divorce, which has to be radically different in terms of how you, I mean, for me, it's just my reality. It's not something that happened, or I don't live it as something that happened to me in the time. Is there anything else that you'd like to leave us with that is important to keep top of mind if somebody's about to call you or call somebody like you?
The last thing I would say is related to the last point, that if it's not working, now is the time. I know a lot of parents stay together for their children, but you may be doing them a disservice. You may be better off apart. I think the science is clear on this, that it's not the divorce itself, it's not the splitting that causes harm to a child. It may seem like that. It may seem like if I divorce my spouse, my child is going to suffer. The science is it's marital discord that most affects a child. So the easiest way to think of it is two happy homes is always going to be better than one unhappy home. And so you have to think about that, how is time spent, quality over quantity, and it can be the better path to have separate homes. If you and your spouse are better people, you're showing up better as parents when you're apart.
Yeah, that's really important to keep in mind. The overall, and maybe you got information on this, is that the tendency is for people not to be supported in continuing their relationships. And there's some line between there where you don't jump into a divorce just because you've had a fight for the last 6 months, but also you don't stay together if it's never going to get resolved.
That's right. But by no means am I saying everyone should rush to get divorced. It may sound like that as a divorce lawyer. My advice is just, if you already know that it is not going to work, now's the time. Staying together, trying to force a square peg into a round hole because you're trying to, keep one home, is maybe not the best path if that one home is going to be an unhappy one for the foreseeable future.
Well, very good, Jonathan. Thank you very much for giving us a lot of information. You brought a lot more clarity to some parts of this that I didn't fully understand. You are at BiermanLaw.com, Bierman with 2 N's at the end, and we'll put that in the show notes so people can find you. But do you only practice in the state of Illinois, or do you take clients from across the country?
I have on occasion practiced in other states, but that's on like a case by case basis. The majority of my practice is Illinois.
In Chicago, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was good to be with you.
Okay, Paul Banis with GreatDad.com. You can find my coaching services at GreatDad.com/go, including my most recent work on resilience and building resilience in the face of everyday challenges, and maybe some of those are at home. Okay, so until next time.